8 years ago, I was pretty sure my life was over. Picture this. I'm standing in the empty shell of an apartment I can't afford anymore, holding a positive pregnancy test in one hand and a scribbled note from my husband, Mark, in the other. He wasn't coming home. Not tonight. Not ever. He'd chosen her, and in doing that, he sentenced me to a life I could never have seen coming. I was 26, pregnant, broke, and completely, terrifyingly alone. He thought he'd broken me. He probably figured I'd just crumble and fade away. He had no idea he wasn't burying me. He was planting a seed. Our life, before it all fell apart, was almost painfully normal. You know, the kind of life you see in commercials for minivans. Mark and I met in college. He was the classic, charming, ambitious business major who could talk his way into any party and out of any trouble. I was the quiet, artsy lit student who found his energy both exciting and a little exhausting. We were total opposites, but somehow we just clicked. He made me bolder, and as he put it, I made him stop and actually see the world. We got married 2 years after we graduated. The wedding was small, just a simple thing in a public garden with our closest friends, because it was all we could afford. But it didn't matter. We had each other. We moved into a one-bedroom apartment filled with mismatched furniture and huge dreams. We'd stay up late, sprawled on our lumpy couch, just plotting out our whole future. He was going to climb the corporate ladder at some marketing firm, and I was working part-time at a bookstore, trying to get my freelance graphic design business off the ground. One day, he'd say, tracing a floor plan of a dream house on my back, "We'll have a big house out in the suburbs, a yard for a dog, maybe two, and a whole room just for your art studio." "And a nursery?" I'd ask, my voice all small and hopeful. "And a nursery," he'd promise, kissing my forehead. When the time is right, we were happy. Or maybe it's more accurate to say, I was happy. I was so wrapped up in the picture-perfect life we were building together that I didn't even notice he was starting to pull the threads loose. The change was so subtle at first. It started with late nights at the office that happened more and more. "Big project," he'd say, brushing me off. A lot of pressure from the bosses. Then came the business trips, these short 1 or 2 day trips to nearby cities. He was always exhausted when he came back, kind of distant. The easy laughter that used to fill our apartment was replaced by this tense silence, cut only by the constant buzzing of his phone. He started guarding his phone like it held national security secrets. It was always face down on the table, and he'd take calls in the other room. One time, I just picked it up to hand it to him, and the pure panic in his eyes actually startled me. "I've got it," he snapped, yanking it out of my hand. He apologized right away, blaming work stress, but the whole thing left this cold pit in my stomach. I'm a trusting person, maybe too trusting. I believed in the man I married. So, I pushed my doubts down and told myself I was just being paranoid. Then, I found out I was pregnant. It wasn't planned, but the second I saw that other pink line show up, this wave of pure joy just washed over me. All the anxiety, all the little fears about the distance between us, they just melted away. This would fix us. A baby. Our baby. I spent the whole day planning how I was going to tell him. I bought a tiny pair of booties and a card that said, "You're going to be a daddy." When he came home that night, I could barely keep it together. I was so excited. He, on the other hand, walked in looking like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He tossed his keys on the counter and let out this heavy sigh. "Tough day?" I asked, my own happiness starting to waver a little. "You could say that," he mumbled, loosening his tie. "Well, I have something that might make it better," I said, holding the little gift bag out to him. He looked at the bag with this weird expression, not curiosity, but dread. He opened it slowly, pulled out the tiny booties, and just stared at them. Then he read the card. I was just watching his face, waiting for that explosion of joy I'd been imagining all day. It never came. His face just went pale. He sank onto the couch without even looking at me. "Mark?" I said, my heart starting to pound. "Aren't you happy?" He finally looked up at me, and his eyes were just hollow. "We need to talk," he said, and in that one moment I knew the tiny crack in our perfect life was about to become a full-blown earthquake. "I can't do this." That's how he started. Not, "I'm sorry," not, "This is really hard to say." Just a blunt, selfish statement. He couldn't do this, as if my pregnancy was some annoying project he could just quit. I just stood there, frozen, my hands automatically moving to my stomach. "What do you mean, you can't do this? We're having a baby, Mark. We are." "No," he said, finally standing up. He wouldn't look at me, just paced around our small living room. "That's the point. This whole thing, it's not what I want right now. My career is finally taking off. We can't afford a baby. I can't be tied down." Every single word felt like a punch. Tied down? We had dreamed about this. But the nursery? The house in the suburbs? That was all your idea. I cried out. "That was then," he shot back, his voice getting louder. "Things change, okay? People change." "What changed, Mark?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "Is it the late nights? The business trips? Is there someone else?" The question just hung there in the air between us, heavy and toxic. He stopped pacing, and he finally met my eyes. What I saw there wasn't guilt. It was cold, hard resolve. He didn't even have the decency to lie. "Her name is Tiffany," he said flatly. "She's an associate at my firm. We've been seeing each other for about 6 months. 6 months. The blood drained from my face. 6 months of lies, big projects, work stress. I did the math in my head, and it all just clicked into place with this sickening clarity. I felt like such a fool. "How could you?" I whispered. "We built a life together. I am carrying your child." And then he delivered the final blow, the one that would haunt me for years. He took a deep breath and said, "She's pregnant too." The world just tilted. I couldn't breathe. I thought I must have misheard him. This had to be some kind of cruel joke. But the look on his face told me it was real. His mistress was also pregnant. The betrayal was so complete, it didn't even feel real. He wasn't just cheating. He wasn't just leaving. He was replacing our baby. He was starting the exact life we had planned, just with somebody else. "Her due date is a month before yours," he added, as if that clinical little detail would somehow make it better. I started to laugh. It was this horrible, hysterical sound that just bubbled up from my shattered soul. "So what? You just chose her? You chose her baby over our baby?" "It's not like that," he said, looking away again. "It's cleaner this way. Tiffany and I, we're on the same page. It just makes more sense. Makes more sense. My entire world, my love, my unborn child, all boiled down to a logistics problem that he had solved." The rest of the night was a blur. He packed a duffel bag like he was just going away for the weekend. He said he'd have his stuff moved out by the end of the week. He told me he was emptying his half of our joint savings account in the morning to get a new place with her. He left me a note with a lawyer's address and said I'd be served with divorce papers. He didn't hug me. He didn't say sorry. The last thing he said before he walked out the door was, "I'm sorry it had to be this way, but you're just too emotional. I need someone who supports my ambition." The door clicked shut, and I just collapsed onto the floor. I was no longer a wife. I was a statistic, and as I lay there clutching my stomach, I made a silent promise to the tiny life inside me. I will not let him break us. We will survive this. I had no clue how, but I knew I had to. The next few days were just a total fog of grief and panic. First things first, survival. Just like he said, the joint savings account was drained. I woke up one morning to a balance of $17.38. That was it. That's all I had. Rent was due in 2 weeks, and I knew he wasn't paying his half. My part-time job at the bookstore barely covered groceries, let alone the full rent. I called my parents, but they were retired on a fixed income and couldn't offer much more than a spot on their sofa bed in another state. I couldn't run away. I had to build a life here, for me and the baby. So, the grind began. I was 3 months pregnant, constantly sick, and bone-tired, but I had no choice. I took extra shifts at the bookstore. I put up flyers in my neighborhood for my graphic design services. Logos, flyers, anything, for way less than the going rate. The work was spotty and paid almost nothing. Then, I hit a new low. I started cleaning houses. I found the gig through a woman at the bookstore, cleaning for her rich friends. I spent my days on my hands and knees, scrubbing floors in mansions, the smell of bleach making my morning sickness even worse. It was soul-crushing. I remember cleaning the bathroom of a woman who was also pregnant. Her house was full of expensive baby gear, and she was complaining to me about the stress of picking a stroller. Meanwhile, I was trying to figure out if I could afford both rent and prenatal vitamins that month. I went into her powder room to splash water on my face and just broke down, muffling my sobs in a fluffy monogram towel. My social life was gone. What could I even say to my friends? Mark had been quick to spin his own story. He told everyone I'd become unstable and demanding, that I'd tried to trap him. Some of them believed him. The invites stopped coming. People I thought were my friends would literally cross the street to avoid me. The loneliness was a physical weight. I'd come home to my dark, empty apartment, eat cheap pasta on the floor because Mark had taken the dining table, and just talk to my baby. I'd put my hand on my growing belly and whisper, "We're a team. It's you and me against the world." The day my son, Leo, was born was the hardest and most beautiful day of my life. I went into labor alone, took a taxi to the hospital alone, filled out the paperwork with a shaking hand, leaving the father's name field agonizingly blank. There was no one's hand to hold, just a kind nurse named Brenda who saw how scared I was and didn't leave my side. When they finally placed Leo on my chest, this tiny, screaming, perfect little person, everything else just melted away. The pain, the betrayal, the loneliness, it all vanished. Looking at his little face, I felt a love so fierce it took my breath away, and with it, a new steely resolve. This wasn't just about my survival anymore. It was about his. Bringing Leo home was both amazing and terrifying. I now had this tiny human who depended on me for literally everything. The stakes were so much higher. The mom guilt was real. Every hour I spent working was an hour away from him, but every dollar I earned was a dollar for his future. My turning point came one night when Leo was about 2 months old. It was 3 a.m. I was rocking him, totally sleep-deprived, and scrolling through a mom forum on my phone. I stumbled on this thread where all these moms were complaining about the same thing, the lack of stylish, functional, and affordable clothes for modern moms. They talked about how maternity wear was frumpy, and baby clothes were either ridiculously expensive or just cheap junk. A little spark went off in my head. I knew this problem. I had spent my pregnancy in baggy t-shirts. I was a designer. I knew fabrics, I knew patterns, and I knew exactly what I, as a new mom, wanted and couldn't find. It was a crazy idea born from sheer exhaustion, but it felt right. What if I could make what these women were looking for? The next day, I took the $300 I had managed to save and went to the fabric district. I bought a secondhand sewing machine, and my tiny living room became my workshop. During Leo's naps and late into the night, I worked. I sketched, I cut, I sewed. My first product was simple, a multi-use scarf that could be a nursing cover and a car seat canopy. It was stylish, soft, and solved a real problem. I used my design skills to make a simple logo and started an Etsy shop and an Instagram page. I took pictures of myself wearing the scarf while holding Leo. I was terrified. What if no one bought it? A week later, I got my first sale. I remember the notification sound on my phone. My heart just jumped. Someone in Ohio bought my scarf. I packed it myself, wrote a handwritten thank you note, and walked it to the post office. That first $40 felt like $1 million. Slowly, one sale became 2, then 10, then 100. I put every penny back into the business. I bought more fabric. My customers started asking for more. I added comfy maternity dresses, and then some matching mommy and me outfits. I was building a brand for women like me, women who didn't want to lose themselves just because they became mothers. The next 2 years were a complete blur of work. I was a one-woman show: designer, seamstress, photographer, customer service, shipping, all while being a single mom to a toddler. There were times I ran out of money, times I was so tired I'd fall asleep at my sewing machine. The business, which I named Leo and Lily, started to outgrow my apartment. I signed a lease on a small studio space and hired my first employee, another single mom from my neighborhood. We launched our own website, moving off Etsy. I learned everything I could about e-commerce and marketing from free online courses. I started sending free products to mommy bloggers, and the brand started to get noticed. The big break came 3 years after I sold that first scarf. An investor, a woman who had built and sold her own successful brand, found Leo and Lily. She saw the potential. She got the vision. After months of negotiations, she invested a significant amount of money into the company. With that funding, everything exploded. We moved into a real office with a warehouse. I hired a full team. Leo and Lily wasn't a little handmade business anymore. It was becoming a real player in the market. 5 years after Mark walked out, I was the founder and CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. I saw my face on the cover of a business magazine. From single mom to CEO. The rise of Leo and Lily. I had a beautiful home. My son was happy, and I was surrounded by a brilliant team. I had built the life Mark told me I was too emotional to have. I'd done it all without him. I honestly hadn't even thought about him in years. Until the day his resume landed on my desk. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my glass-walled office reviewing projections when my assistant Chloe knocked. "Sorry to interrupt, Clara," she said, "but HR sent over the final shortlist for the new senior project manager position for your sign-off." "Thanks, Chloe. Just leave them here," I said, not really looking up. Later, I finally picked up the stack of resumes. It was a big role, overseeing our move into retail stores. The first 3 were impressive. Ivy League, great experience. Then I picked up the 4th one. The name at the top, Mark Peterson. I just froze. It couldn't be. But as I scanned down, Everything matched. The university, the old marketing firm. Then I saw a string of short-term jobs over the past 8 years, with weird gaps in between. He was applying for a job at my company. He had no idea I had changed my name back to my maiden name, Clara Evans, years ago. The company was Leo and Lily. There was nothing connecting it to the woman he left behind. My first thought was to just throw it in the trash. But then, another idea started to form. A sharp, cold, and undeniably satisfying idea. I buzzed my assistant. "Chloe, schedule interviews for all 4 candidates. I'll be sitting in. And for the last one, Mr. Peterson, schedule him for Friday at 4 p.m. in the main boardroom." The rest of the week was weird. I was buzzing with this vengeful energy. On Friday, I dressed carefully, not flashy, just a tailored navy blue dress and sharp heels. I wanted to look like what I was, a CEO, calm, confident, in control. At 3:55, the intercom buzzed. "Miss Evans, your 4 o'clock is here." "Thanks, Chloe. Show him to the boardroom. I'll be there in 5. I took a deep breath, looked at my reflection, and walked toward the boardroom. My HR director, Lena, was already there. And across the long table sat Mark. He looked older, tired. The arrogance he used to wear was gone, replaced by the anxiety of a guy who really needs a job. His suit was a little dated. He looked up when I walked in, and for a split second his eyes widened. A tiny flicker of recognition, but then it was gone. He didn't know me. I was just the boss. "Mr. Peterson," I said, my voice cool and even. "I'm Clara Evans, the CEO. Thanks for coming in." "Ms. Evans," he said, shaking my hand. It was clammy. "A pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity." I sat at the head of the table. After a few standard questions from Lena, I cut in. "Mark. May I call you Mark?" He nodded eagerly. "Your resume is interesting. A lot of movement. Why have you changed roles so often?" "Ah, yes. I've been seeking the right fit, the right culture. Some of those previous roles were less ambitious than I would have liked." "I see," I said. "Tell me about a time a project failed. A time when you failed. What did you learn?" He stammered. "Well, failure is a strong word. I see them as learning experiences. Of course," I said smoothly. "So, tell me about your biggest learning experience." He rambled through some vague story. "It was weak. I decided it was time. My company, Leo and Lily," I began, my voice calm, "is built on authenticity, resilience, and supporting modern parents. What's the most important element in building a brand that connects with people?" "Trust," he said immediately. "They have to believe in your story, your values." "I agree," I said, holding his gaze. "Trust is everything. So let's talk about personal values. How do you handle situations where your personal and professional commitments conflict?" "Family comes first, of course," he said with a practiced smile. "But a dedicated professional finds a balance." I let that hang in the air. "That's interesting. Because 8 years ago, you made a choice between 2 very significant personal commitments. You chose one because it was cleaner and made more sense. You said you needed someone who supported your ambition, not someone who was too emotional. Do you still believe that was the right decision?" The color just drained from his face. That flicker of recognition ignited into full-blown horror. He stared at me, his mouth hanging open. He was really seeing me now. "Clara," he whispered. I gave him a small, cold smile. I didn't say a thing. I just let him sit there, in the heart of the empire I built from the ashes of the life he torched. The senior project manager role requires an exceptional level of commitment, integrity, and the ability to see long-term projects through to completion, I said. My voice like glass. Based on your history, it seems you have a problem with follow through. You tend to abandon projects when a more appealing option comes along. We can't have that here. Thank you for your time, Mr. Peterson. Lena will see you out. I stood up, smoothed down my dress, and walked out of the boardroom without looking back, leaving him sitting in the ruins he'd made for himself. What a story. It just shows that sometimes the best revenge isn't loud and explosive. It's quiet, deliberate success built over years of hard work. If you have a story like this or just want to share your thoughts, drop a comment below. I read every single one. And if you like stories about karma, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's next.